How's it going? I realize that there's a lot of you that have only just recently heard about me or have just started following me. So I thought this would be a good chance to talk about how I got here. So let's travel all the way back when I was in late primary school. At that point, music was already a big part of my life. And I had just been given this, an iPod Shuffle. This was the entire extent of all of my music knowledge. Anything my mum bought and listened to on iTunes went on to here, and she used to listen almost exclusively to Skits Mix. This was the foundation for a lot of the music that I listen to today.
1, 2, 1, 2.
Now, if you fast forward a couple of years, we'll get to when I was about 10 years old, and I got gifted a Samsung tablet. And the first app that I ever downloaded on it was called eDJing. Or edging. eDJing? They wouldn't call the app edging, would they? Anyway, the reason why I downloaded this was because I just discovered YouTube and the wide world of EDM labels. This is when I discovered Proximity and Monster Cat. These two labels became the solid foundation for my music taste. Now, if we bring it to early high school, I was about 12 or 13 years old, I started learning how to produce on GarageBand. I obviously sucked, but you all gotta start somewhere, right? Until this fateful day in year 7, when I am sitting next to my friend Ruby in music class. I'm making music on GarageBand. She's messing around with a DJ app called Virtual DJ Home. This app, I was so intrigued that I downloaded it. It became my bread and butter for the entirety of my schooling. This was the time when my DJing became a core part of my life. On the bus, before, after school, in the middle of class, I was mixing, I was producing music, and it was at this time that I got more invested into Monster Cat. If we cut forward to 2016, the messaging app Discord starts to pop off. I got very, very well connected into the Monster Cat community. I started interacting there daily, and I started to participate in their mix contest. These mix contests became a very important time for me to showcase and start to hone in on these skills that I had just been playing around with over the last few years. Now, it was at that time that I decided that I needed an alias. I wanted to go with something electronic, computers. I've always been a big fan of the retro aesthetic. So I went with Screen Blind. It was cool to me back then. I started submitting to these mix contests under this new name. And as I'm progressing through school, I finally had enough money to get my very first DJ decks, the Tractor Control S4. This is when I started to take music production and DJing very seriously. And in the online sphere, I had enough people around me that were starting to produce music and put out music themselves. So it was at this point that I rebranded myself to Julian Carisen, and I created the Carisen's Collection podcast. It was half an excuse for me to put out mixes that I made and half an excuse to help my friends by promoting songs that they had put out. And so I decided to start a record label. In comes Carisen Collective. Some people have even grown to do some huge events with some huge names. Music became my escape, my hobby, my passion. The music podcast that I was doing unfortunately ran into some issues because Spotify decided to change how podcasting and music was being treated. Essentially, you weren't allowed to have music on podcasts. I obviously didn't have the connections to do anything in person, but I ran a lot of events online. And as silly as having a festival in Minecraft sounds, we had some really big budding artists joining us that are still big to this day. My first travel over to Vancouver in Canada, I met some people that I had been looking up to for years. I went through school, some people on my label decided to leave, and I put the label on the back burner. I moved away from home, and instead of focusing on a label and other artists, I decided to prioritize myself. As the first lot of restrictions during COVID had lifted, I started doing open deck nights at various venues in Wollongong. I then got the offer for my first ever club gig. Grand. I'd been going there for the first week after COVID. They needed a new opener for their club room. And I learned more in those first 6 months of DJing at a club than I did in the last 5 years of DJing at home. Turns out getting thrown off the deep end really does wonders for learning quick. I started with house music that I liked, but I started to notice that the remixes and edits were the ones that people were engaging with more. So I started to centering my house sets around remixes of popular songs. And I started to work my way up. From the open set of the side room to the peak time set of the main room at the Grand. It was then that I got asked to do Mr. Crown, a venue that a lot of you would know me from. I started for the first time to play hip hop and R&B in the downstairs bar area until they wanted me in the main stage upstairs, and that's when a lot of you started to meet me. This by far was the craziest part of my career. Every Wednesday, sometimes Thursday, Friday, Saturday, I was there. I became more and more familiar with the equipment, learned so quickly how to get better. And this is the point that I went all in on my career. I put the label on a hiatus. I left my uni degree because as much as I loved acting, I needed to go all in on this opportunity or I was gonna lose it. Once the scene in Wollongong was starting to wane a bit, I decided that I needed to make a hard pivot. I was getting to a point where I was getting a bit frustrated with the Wollongong scene and I was worried about stagnating. So I started to take some random gigs in Sydney. I started to get to know a bunch of the DJs that were around the Sydney scene. Then now a very good friend of mine reached out and I started doing Ivy Pool. I had done my very first Ivy Thursdays and I was just starting to do these bigger and bigger venues in Sydney. Till it got to a point where it just wasn't viable to be doing Wollongong anymore. And damn, bro, you enjoying that? You good? Wait, what was that? I shut down my label. I started putting out edits that I had made for myself in the club. But most importantly, I put Wollongong behind me. Not willingly, but the crowds in Wollongong were changing. It was not the same that it was 3 years ago. People didn't really want to go out as much. Hello, my friend. Hey, buddy. Say hello. Hello. This is Chess, by the way. This has been sitting with us this entire video. So, I took the leap of faith. Argyle every weekend, Ivy Pool almost every weekend. I also got the opportunity to run a bunch of different events across a bunch of different genres. And that pretty much brings me to where we are now. I've been playing a bunch of venues around Sydney, so many supportive friends around me, and supportive from you guys too, and I could not be any more grateful about it. So yeah, that's pretty much my career life story. I hope that gave you a little bit of inspiration, insight. And if you're wondering what's next, I'm going to be going all in on content over the next few months. Streaming, music, edits, skits, you name it, I'm working on it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting me. Have a wonderful rest of your day.